Hi everyone, so great to have you join us today. We're going to dive into a fun conversation about cooking, ingredients, and some creative solutions we've come up with in the kitchen. Let's get started. So, I was recently preparing one of my favorite desserts, pecan pie, for a family gathering. It's a classic dish, especially here in California where we love our sweet treats. Pecan pie traditionally requires corn syrup to get that perfect gooey texture, but I suddenly realized I was completely out of it. Corn syrup is a sweet, thick syrup made from cornstarch and is commonly used in baking, particularly in the South and Midwest, to add sweetness and moisture to dishes like pecan pie, caramel, and even some candies. Faced with this shortage, I had to think on my feet. Instead of just substituting with something like honey or maple syrup, which could change the flavor too much, I decided to make my own version of corn syrup at home. I combined sugar, water, and a bit of cream of tartar, and let it simmer until it reached the right consistency. It wasn't exactly the same as store-bought corn syrup, but it worked beautifully in the pie, giving it that rich, sweet, and sticky texture we all love.
Syrup, that sounds amazing. I love that you made your own syrup. I have to ask, did it change the flavor of the pie at all? And did your family notice anything different?
Thanks, Chloe. The flavor was slightly different, maybe a bit more caramelized, but it actually added a nice depth to the pie. My family didn't seem to notice the difference at all. They just loved it.
Sarah, I'm so impressed by your quick thinking. What was the hardest part about making the syrup from scratch? Was there a moment where you thought it might not turn out?
Thanks, Maya. The toughest part was getting the syrup to the right consistency. I had to watch it closely to avoid it becoming too thick or too thin. But once I got it right, I was confident it would work out.
Sarah, that's such a clever solution. Did you consider any other alternatives before deciding to make your own syrup? I'm curious if there were any other ideas that crossed your mind.
I did think about using maple syrup or honey, but I was worried they might overpower the pecans. Making my own seemed like the best way to keep the pie's traditional flavor intact.
Sarah, that's really resourceful. I'm curious. Do you think you'll ever use your homemade syrup again? Or was this a one-time thing?
You know, Emily, I think I might. It was surprisingly easy, and I like the idea of controlling the ingredients. Plus, it's always nice to know you can whip something up in a pinch.
Building on what Sarah said, when I buy corn syrup, I usually look for organic options. In Florida, where I live, I use it for making key lime pie and other citrus desserts. The organic corn syrup often has a more natural sweetness, which I love. It's important to check that it's non-GMO, as corn syrup is often made from genetically modified corn, which some people prefer to avoid. I completely agree, Maya. In Washington, I use corn syrup for making marshmallows and homemade candies. Freshness is key for me. I always check the expiration date, because older syrup can crystallize and affect the texture of the sweets. It's essential to store it properly too, in a cool, dry place, to maintain its quality.
Both great points. In Texas, I often use corn syrup in barbecue sauces. The flavor of the corn syrup really enhances the smoky, sweet notes. For me, the thickness of the syrup is crucial. I prefer syrup that's thick enough to coat the back of a spoon, as it helps achieve that perfect glaze on meats.
I love all these tips. In New York, I use corn syrup for making caramel and glazes. The clarity of the syrup matters to me. I usually go for the clear corn syrup because it doesn't alter the color of my dishes. And as a food blogger, I appreciate that it's easy to work with and produces consistent results.
I agree with all of you. For me, in California, it's about the versatility of corn syrup. I use it in everything from pies to frostings. I look for a balance between sweetness and thickness, so the syrup doesn't overpower the other ingredients. And like Jennifer mentioned, it's important to be aware of the syrup crystallizing, especially if it's been sitting on the shelf for too long.
Speaking of alternatives, in New York, I often use golden syrup as a substitute for corn syrup. It has a slightly richer flavor with a hint of caramel, which works well in desserts. It's also easier to find in specialty stores here. However, it does have a darker color and stronger taste, so it's not always a perfect match for corn syrup.
In Texas, I sometimes use agave syrup as an alternative. It's lighter in flavor and not as thick, which can be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on the dish. Agave is sweeter, so I tend to use a bit less of it. The flavor is more neutral compared to corn syrup, which makes it versatile, but you have to be careful with the sweetness.
Down in Florida, I use cane syrup as a substitute. It's more robust and has a deeper molasses flavor, which can add a unique twist to dishes. However, it's not as sweet as corn syrup, so you might need to adjust the recipe. I love using it in pecan pies when I want a richer, more complex flavor.
In Washington, I like using brown rice syrup as an alternative. It's less sweet and has a mild, nutty flavor, which works well in healthier versions of sweets. It's thicker than corn syrup, so it gives a good consistency in candies and bars, but it can be harder to find here. So I stock up when I see it.
I've tried honey as an alternative here in California. It's sweeter and more floral, which can change the flavor profile of a dish. It's also thicker, so I usually mix it with a bit of water to get the right consistency. It's a great option for recipes where you want to add a little extra depth of flavor. This has been such an insightful discussion. We've covered a lot today, from how to handle a shortage of corn syrup to tips for purchasing it and alternatives to consider. Maya talked about organic corn syrup. Emily emphasized the importance of freshness. Jennifer highlighted thickness, and Chloe focused on clarity. And when it comes to alternatives, we've got golden syrup, agave syrup, cane syrup, brown rice syrup, and honey. Thanks to each of you for sharing your expertise and experiences. And with that, we're wrapping up for today. Thank you all for joining us, and I hope you found our conversation helpful. Until next time, happy cooking!